Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here for 1455's fourth annual SummerFest. If you've been here with us since Thursday, my gratitude and congratulations. And for everyone who has only two eyes, two ears, and one brain, here's a reminder. Every single session has been recorded, and we will be making all of this content freely available via our YouTube page, which you can access by going and checking us out at 1455litarts.org. And you can see what else we get up to the rest of the year. Hint, it's all awesome and is all free. By the way, on that YouTube page and scattered throughout our website is video to everything we've done, including our previous 3 festivals, all of our author series, our interview series, our movable type reading parties, basically hundreds and hundreds of hours of amazing footage that features some of the best storytellers in the world. I will have a few concluding words after our keynote today, but let's get right down to business. That's what we're here for. We are so honored this year to feature the amazing artwork of Kim Triedman, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for almost a decade now. I've followed her as a writer, an extraordinary poet, and more recently as a collagist. And if you've been paying attention to any of our marketing collateral, you've already seen her work. We're going to have an opportunity to sit down and talk about her work, her process, how she navigates between the worlds of written and visual and everything in between, which is going to be very enlightening and very inspiring. And then after we have our keynote speaker, those of you that are fans of 1455 are already familiar with the miraculous Jenna Bloom. She is, in short, the ideal contemporary literary citizen, in addition to being a best-selling author, co-founder of A Mighty Blaze. She's an amazing human being. So you're going to enjoy that keynote, and I welcome you to take part in that. I hope you enjoy all of it. So we will see you soon. Enjoy the show, and thank you for being here. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for checking out 1455's Summer Festival. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director, and I encourage you to find out more about us and what we do both during the festival and throughout the year with all the free programming we offer. You can check out everything we do at 1455litarts.org. And if I had to say, I think the aspect of running a nonprofit that I enjoy the most is the ceaseless opportunities it provides me to learn from and be inspired by amazing storytellers from around the world. That is truly the gift that keeps giving. And we're trying to give a little bit of that gift through the SummerFest. And I'm grateful and happy to share that. This is a moment I have been eagerly anticipating. I am able to chat with our featured guest, Kim Triedman. Kim's amazing work has already been featured in 1455's digital publication, Movable Type, for issue 9, which was on the theme of connection. So again, at 1455litarts.org, you can find out all about that issue and that magazine and what we do. But Kim's pieces are so remarkable that I want to share that I had enthusiastic backing from the entire 1455 team to feature her. She was thankfully generous and gracious enough to allow us to showcase her work. So everything you see in our marketing collateral on the website and our social media posts is featuring her work. So I am giddy to talk to her and talk about her process. So let me introduce my friend. Kim is a visual artist working primarily in collage and mixed media. She's exhibited her work at galleries and museums throughout the northeastern and midwestern United States, including Boston and New York City. Her collage and mixed media pieces have garnered numerous honors and are in several private collections, both here and abroad. In addition to being a visual artist, Kim's also a prize-winning poet and novelist with 4 published books. She works out of her home studio in Arlington, Massachusetts, and you can find out a lot more about her at kimtriedman.com. Kim, what a joy. I literally been looking forward to this for months. So thank you for being here. Thank you for letting us use your unbelievable work.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so glad to catch up with you a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another a joy, as we said right before we came on. You know, this Zoom thing is the new normal, but
yeah.
I celebrate the fact that it does enable us to connect in ways we couldn't connect before. So small blessings. I think it's appropriate to start at the beginning. You and I met each other as writers at the Noepe Center at Martha's Vineyard, our beloved Martha's Vineyard. Shout out to Justin Aaron, as always, for his vision. So for me, I fell in love with your art and your writing, which of course I maintain a love for. So for me, it's just been unbelievable and mind-boggling to see how you have not only branched out into other, idioms, but mastered. So why don't we talk a little bit about your process and your trajectory, balancing and among your other talents, writing and collage and visual work?
Sure. Well, excuse me. I started out as a writer. The visual art came second.
Yep.
And I started out as a writer at a relatively...
Feel free to take a drink. This is informal.
Okay. I'm okay, I think. Relatively late age. I am untrained in writing as well as in art making, but that's only given me the ability to break rules I didn't know were there, which I think has served me well. So I started out taking a poetry class in my 40s and loving it. I guess I had been writing some poetry on my own before then. And I just kept with it and ended up coming up with a chapbook and coming up with a writing group, and the chapbook won an award, and I have a couple full-length collections that came out afterwards. I think when I was at Noepe for writing, I was working on one of the collections, I guess. The weird thing was that the two full collections and my novel, which is called The Other Room, all came out in 2013. So it was my 40s and early 50s were crazy with writing, and I just kind of did things by the seat of my pants. I loved that. I started writing my novel by waking up in the middle of the night after starting to read a Barbara Kingsolver novel, and I just had a voice in my head, and I'd never so much as written a short story. And I just started spinning these scenes in the middle of the night. I started waking up more and more frequently, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know, they seemed to be connected in some way, but all of this stuff has just sort of, it's arrived. I haven't really gone searching for it. And yeah, so the books came out, and that was when I was in my early 50s, I guess. And for about 2 years, I was dead in the water and very unhappy, real writer's block, and not knowing where to sort of pick up and go next, and not wanting to be too deliberate about pushing it. I did try to sort of jumpstart the process by taking a novel generator class at Grub Street here in Boston. And I got halfway through a novel, but it felt very directed, and I had never worked that way. And I didn't work well that way. I just wasn't loving what I was doing. So I put that aside, and my mom's an artist. My daughter's a RISD grad and an artist. And I've always been a maker. I've always done things with my hands and taken pleasure from that. And one day I just found a couple vintage window frames on the side of the road and put them in my car and decided to do something with them. And I ended up collaging them. And that was the beginning. The original work, most of the early work is on reclaimed windows. And that was its own, it had its own sort of, provided its own sort of prompt. Windows, you know, time and space and the structure of the window panes, the size and orientation played into the composition. And for a couple of years, I think I was just doing windows. And since then, I've moved out, and I'm working on all kinds of media, mostly canvas, some wood blocks. And it's what's interesting to me, and you can break in any time, but what's interesting to me is that after I stopped doing the windows, I think something started to cohere in the artwork itself. And by that, I mean, as I say, nothing I've ever done has felt directed. I never know what I'm going to create, right? With a poem, with a novel, with a piece of artwork. I never know what I'm going to create when I start out. But all of a sudden, I started realizing that all of these pieces I was creating were focusing on similar themes, primarily gender expectations, nostalgia, the collision of the old expectations and new realities, and some of the damage that's done, especially to women.
Yeah. And
so that's sort of been happening. And I just had a big show, solo show, and I paired a number of the works with poems that partially inspired them, poems from earlier on that partially inspired them. And that was my first experience in sort of cross-fertilization of the two things.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things, I mean, there's so many things that I'm just enchanted by, but we talk a lot with purpose at 1455 about storytelling. And it's a very intentional interrogation of course, story means words on a page, and it could be talking. But we really have been enjoying, especially with Movable Type, not just celebrating the different ways story can be told, but what it means. And I think your work, as much as anything that we've published in Movable Type, obliges the viewer to think about, how does story work, or how many different levels can it work on? And your work is so rich, and it's at once provocative, but also informative. And there's just so much going on, but it's never busy, and it's always telling a story.
It's narrative. It's highly narrative, and that's no surprise to me. You know, I've always said to people that when and collage work in particular, I think invites that. Yeah. I have always told people that making a collage for me is very much like writing poetry, and that collage, the process is precisely the same. With a poem, I don't know what I'm going to write when I go sit outside or in front of my computer, but some word or combination of words will get me started, and then this thing will just kind of spill down the hill and gather up twigs and bits of bark, and and at some point it'll land me with the last line, and then I'll know what the piece is called and why I had to write it, what it's about and why I had to write it. With collage, it's exactly the same thing. I usually start with an image. I'll show you, I'm going to show you something I'm just beginning to work on now.
Okay.
So a friend sent me this image, which is an amazing image for our time.
Yes.
And I had been playing around with a couple other images in my studio. I found this staircase with a woman kind of half off, and I decided to reproduce it, which I did to ultimately create a longer staircase. And then playing with two other pieces. I mean, this is particularly for me, I think that the Roe v. Wade stuff is really marinating. And
sure.
I have this little piece of these old white men.
Yeah.
You know, and that may or may not find its way into that piece. And I also found this lovely image of a bird. Mm-hmm. So, as I say, it's usually just a gift. I will have something that interests me, and sometimes I just drop it onto another piece, and it makes the connection. And once that's there, I just go with it, and it's not a surprise because of what's going on in a subterranean way. It's not a surprise to me that all of these pieces have ended up very connected thematically.
Yeah, and you know, I think what you're articulating, Kim, you're doing all of us a service, because I've talked to so many creatives, and you know, one of the perennial questions that we all kind of wrestle with and obsess over is, where does creativity come from, and how do you develop craft? And the most satisfied and successful storytellers that I've spoken to appreciate this balance between doing the work. I mean, you know, you've got to show up, you have to work at your craft, but appreciating the creative flow and how powerful and unknowable the subconscious is. I think poets and collagists and everyone really, it's only after time that you can look back and go, well, of course there's a thematic theme, because that's what's all been boiling back in my head. But your description of how you kind of take these gifts, to me, disabuses what's often the kind of a pretentious or an impossible to articulate process. Like, the muse speaks to me and I create it. It's like, that it's true, but it's so much more than that. It's still ultimately a reflection of what's up here.
Right. And I think in my case, with both poetry and collage, and probably also novel writing to some extent, it really is about these accidental collisions, and that for me is the spark, and the spark has always been that you know, sometimes literally an image can fall off my desk and fall next to another image, and I know where I'm going. Now, the part of me that made sense of that combination is subterranean. You know, the part of me that decided when I saw it that was going to be something useful, that is subterranean.
Right.
Craft comes in other ways. You know, once you have your connection, then you start utilizing the things you've learned along the way in terms of fleshing out your composition or your poem or your novel.
Yeah. So I can relate very, very resonates on a deep level with me, Kim, because a lot of, or I'll just say, I won't even say a lot, I'll say a number of poems I've written will derive from, if I'm just reading the news or reading for pleasure or listening to something, I'll stop the movie, stop the record, and it's a one line or one thought or one image. And then it is this combination of, well, it's purposeful because whatever that word or image was inspiring me to stop. But it's like that unlocks something, and it's a combination of process and intellect, but also when you step away from it, you go, 20 minutes ago, I was brushing my teeth, and now there's a new genesis of a new poem. So I bring that up not only to kind of, you know, joy the solidarity, but I think it's good for people that are either beginning to be creatives or want to understand how this process works. I think we respect it enough to say that no one can explain it.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about, I think, really describes this wonderful balance of being a creative person, but just being open to what's flowing through us.
Right. And I also think that, you know, I think what makes having a book published or having some artwork shown on a gallery wall important is that when we create something, I'll use a poem as an example. The words as they come out are meant to be received somehow, somewhere. You don't always have to know how or where, but you're writing to something else, to some other end of the phone line. And I think what's really interesting is that it takes a person coming at that, picking up that phone line and coming at that with his or her own set of experiences, expectations, biases, to create this other thing entirely, which is the experience of that piece. And I find that fascinating. And I think when it's very easy for people to say it shouldn't matter that this book gets out in the world. But I think part of it is just that artists, like everyone else, are seeking a way to communicate, to throw those lines out there.
Yeah, this is why I have adored you since we first met, because I've used almost identical language, which when I've written about craft or talked about it is, yeah, of course there's a sense of, you're proud of your work, or you're inspired, or you're trying to inspire or inform or educate. But I think the primary impulse and why most of us aren't content to just put it in our journals, mm-hmm. It's a desire to communicate. It's a desire to connect.
Right. And to pin something down so perfectly, like a butterfly to a whatever.
Yeah.
That that you have said exactly what you needed to say, and that someone else can hear that. Yes.
And dare I say that in an interesting way, there's actually a perfection in that imperfection. Like I've found, again, this is about you, but just speaking of certain poems I've written, I'm aware when I'm done that they can be refined, but I feel like with certain types of poetry, you lose that immediacy if you obsess over it. And you also are maybe preventing the opportunity for discovery from the person or the people that will read it. And when people come to you and say, this is what I took from that, and it wasn't necessarily what you intended, to me, that's where the real magic happens.
It is. I mean, it's that person taking something you've put out there and adding his or her own self to it and coming up with something entirely different. And it's like the practice of collage, starting with two images and watching them turn into one other thing that's entirely different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I use the word provocative, that veers into clichédom, but I really mean provocative in many senses of the word when I talk about your work, because some of the themes certainly are successfully provocative, just what you were just talking about, but also it's provocative and interrogative, that you're relying on the viewer's intelligence and sensitivity to make these connections. In other words, I appreciate what you're saying about the spontaneity and the subterranean elements, but you because you have this rich life experience, and you're obviously a deeply learned woman, you're meeting the viewer, you're expecting the viewer to a certain extent let me put it this way. The people I think that will get the most from your work are bringing their own intelligence and sensitivity, and then that manifests. And it goes on a lot of deeper levels, because I don't just enjoy your work aesthetically. Like, it makes me think,
right?
Angry.
And that's right. And that's what you want. That's what you want out of an experience with a book or a piece of art, or a piece of music, for that matter.
So here's an interesting question, right? Mm-hmm. Do you find, because collage can satisfy on certain levels, that frankly, in my humble opinion, poetry can't? It's not to compare them. Are you finding yourself really leaning more into collage work? Or are you still hearing the poetic voice and you just kind of, you're able to channel different energy levels into different things? Or would you describe yourself as more of a collagist at this point?
At this point, I would say more of a collagist, and there are reasons for that. One, I mean, I would have to put my head in a very different place to try to start up the poetry writing in a big way. And one thing I found is that the writing for me has always cut very close to the bone. It's literal. It's, and the narratives, bump up against my own personal experiences, relationships, whatever.
Right.
I think that there's more, it's a little bit less clear in the collage making. And that's why I say that I'm often surprised when I finish a piece that I I'm surprised that I made it and why I made it, because I really, it doesn't hurt as much sometimes. It doesn't, you know, it's not, it's a gentler process, I find. So I can go, that's okay. I can go back to the poetry, and I expect I will in my life. But right now, especially I think in light of all the crap that the world is dealing with, all the PTSD that we're all suffering, this feels kinder.
I love that. I love that interpretation. And, you know, one of the best compliments that I can attempt to pay you is that when I look at your work, I don't know what it's about, and I know exactly what it's about, mm-hmm. Which to me says a couple of things, right? It's successful in the sense that it's forcing me to have a reaction and mm-hmm. think, mm-hmm. but it's also leaving this wonderful space for interpretations, and allows me to interact with the piece. And I would imagine even a piece of yours that's, say, more deliberate than, say, another one, you know, mm-hmm. less abstract, is still allowing the individual to bring their own experience, which will either deepen or complicate, yep. or, you know, yeah, I mean, deepen or complicate their own feelings about what's going on.
Right, right. Yeah, it has been very satisfying, and I love the fact that it feels wildly organic. I mean, I feel like a crazy person sometimes, and as soon as I finish one piece, I'm back at it with another, because it gives you a high like nothing else. Yeah. And it's a process of discovery. You don't know where you're going until you go down the path. And
well, and you know what you're talking about again is the process itself, and what I think is so helpful for people that ask all the time about writer's block or being blocked or what's the purpose of all this. And I think again, what I appreciate you articulating is there's a lot of levels. We want to communicate and connect. We'd love to maybe move people and maybe even make a little bit of money. But at the end of the day, and especially after years and years, if we are not astonishing ourselves,
exactly,
scratching some itches, I think even the most, I dare say, even the more successful, and however we define that, let's just yep. say money-wise and, right. and commercial.
Yep.
Even the most successful artists are unhappy because if you're doing it or somehow you found a way to do it that connects, but it's not connecting in a deep or meaningful way.
It's not engaging something, again, deeply rooted, deep down inside. And that when I told you that I started a second novel in that novel, whatever it's called, novel generator class, it felt like what craft I had picked up along the way. And it gave me nothing back. Ultimately, it gave me nothing back. And, you know, and I would bring chapters in and they would get critiqued by the class, and the writing was good. You know, I knew the writing was good, but I knew it was too much in my head and not enough in my gut.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I also think that it feels a little bit easier to push that a little further with visual imagery, with visual narrative.
Yeah. Well, and you remind me, Kim, another thing, which is a personal kind of mantra, and I don't claim that this is original, but if one is not fully invested and committed to what one's doing, how dare one expect anyone else to pay attention to it?
Right.
Like, the world is these endeavors are filled with solitude and rejection and misunderstanding. But my gosh, if you're not feeling it and feeling like I've created something that no one else could have done,
right.
and that alone is sufficient.
And feeling proud of it, feeling that it's exactly what it needed to be.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I get that from your work, right? Like it stays, I guess I can't say written, it or collage, like a good piece of writing stays written. Your work stays created because it is like when I return to it, when I look at it, I'm feeling and seeing different things. So I guess to me, there's a tinge of envy as well as admiration in saying, I don't have that ability. So I really admire the ways that collage can incorporate a lot of these different aspects of storytelling. I think, especially in 2022, when attention spans are lesser, I don't know if I was just starting out now, I would gravitate toward novels. I've written a couple of novels, but it's just a whole different process. And I think we reflect the times we live in to a certain extent.
Right. It is a different process. And I didn't have a clue how to go about it. And that's why it took 10 years. Lots of downtime during that 10 years, but it, again, with all the inefficiencies, I did allow myself to be pulled along rather than pushing the process myself. And I'm sure if I were to go back and reread the novel, there would be things that I would do differently. Of course, I think most people feel that way, right. But the experience of writing it gave me all the same things that writing a good poem gives me, or making a collage that really works gives me. And it didn't feel directed, it didn't feel forced. As I got closer and closer to the end of the novel, everything was a surprise to me. How all of the strings that I threw out at the beginning came back and connected. Yeah. So it was extraordinarily fun and exciting.
Well, Kim, another thing I want to thank you for, especially as you're our featured artist, and this is a featured conversation. So much, if you go to a literary festival or you look online, just in the industry, in academia, so much of this is centered around how to sell this, how to market this. And that's an important and inextricable part of any process. But what we're talking about, we haven't even mentioned the commercial aspect or aspiration. Right. We're really talking about craft, but doing it in a way that's, I think, completely down to earth, completely relatable. And we're talking about something that's deeply personal to you and frankly requires a great deal of skill to pull off. But we're talking about the personal enrichment. And I personally find that is so lacking in many contemporary conversations about this. So this is very refreshing to have this perspective.
I agree completely. For me, it's the thing that keeps me getting to this messy table every day.
And it's usually kind of an obligatory closing question would be, what's next? I think you've already answered that. I'll let you actually answer that, but I will just say the fact that you are still finding yourself inspired, and when you're done with one piece, you're ready to jump into the next. Right. I know you know this, but that is a very blessed space to be in. Right. And I think that's the space. If more artists were trying to achieve that, I think our world would be kinder, the art would be better, and people would find, ironically, more satisfaction in the work that they do.
Right. So that being said, I do have a couple ideas that have been percolating, not for individual pieces, but for sort of thematic constructs. One of them is, one of my books of poetry is called Hades Town. That was one that came out in 2013. And it's a prose poem, a long prose poem. It's partly myth-based, deals thematically with 9/11 in New York. And each page of a spread is a little bit of text. It's a little bit of text. They accumulate and create this larger story. But I have thought about the possibility of trying to get someone to help finance my way to illustrating it. Doing a really nice book. I think it's my favorite piece of writing of all my stuff. And I'd love to set myself to the task of just, reading a little bit of text and letting my mind go. So that's one. The other is my dad passed away this past year, and so I'm kind of thinking about something with the title of Postcards to My Dead Father. You know, that kind of thing cuts pretty close, but I also think there's a lot, I mean, there's so much that goes into a life and a relationship, and there was so much humor in the man, and there was so much color, and I have no doubt that it would generate some good art.
I mean, talk about opening the floodgates, right?
Yeah.
Creative, emotional, aesthetic floodgates. Yeah. I'm giddy thinking about the avenues that could open up. Because look, what you're talking about again would be a deeply personal project, but one that just about every human being can relate to. So these are deeply universal themes. And again, I think what we're talking through while your work is so affecting on so many levels.
Well, I'm happy to be where I am. And as I said to you, I think a little while ago, in the world that we're living in now, I have a tremendous need to just put my head down and not watch the clock and let an afternoon go by in that fog that we all know, and let pages develop, whether they have words on them or pictures on them. And it's the best antidote for these times for me.
That's it, Kim. I think I certainly believe that there are powerful forces that not only want to be powerful, but they want to make as many people apathetic as possible, because that completes or perpetuates this vicious cycle. Being engaged and refusing to be apathetic, I think, is not only the best antidote, it's the best way to continue this process of bearing witness and connecting with others, inspiring others, and of course, finding the personal resolve and inspiration. So, Kim, what a gift you've given us, letting us talk about your work, letting us feature your work. I don't know how we can repay, but my gratitude to you as a model. The model of our storytelling community is deep, and I can just thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I have very much enjoyed this, and I've very much enjoyed maintaining a connection with you all these years.
Well, let it continue, because as I'm fond of saying, both personally and as it relates to 1455, we're only like the mafia in one regard. Once you come in, you don't get out. So as far as I'm concerned, you will find a very eager and enthusiastic advocate for your work going forward. So anytime we are able to talk about it, showcase it, celebrate it, we're in. So good health, be well, keep busy, and thank you for making our world a more beautiful place.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, folks, thank you again for checking out and being part of our festival. Whether you're watching this live or you're checking us out on our YouTube page, that's why we record these conversations, so we can go back. I know I go back and get inspired. I hope that this inspires you. You can check us out at 1455litarts.org. You'll find plenty of links to Kim's work and Kim's website. Check her out, and we'll see you soon on a future free program. Everyone be well, be safe, and thank you.
Thank you.